as a leading bank executive, can these kinds of frauds ever really be prevented?
Well, I don't know if they can ever fully be prevented, but it's extremely important to have very strong compliance procedures and very strong oversight. I'm sure there are always, rogue traders that can get around it, but it's extremely important to continue to beef them up.
And so are we going to see, do you think, as a result of this, is it likely that we will see efforts to do just that when we get this sort of information, when we get this sort of, when an event like this does happen, I suppose executives within the bank will be encouraged to tighten controls to some extent?
Yeah, and I don't think we know much about the facts of the case yet, but in the past that's been the result of similar occurrences, so I would assume.
Okay, and so I want to talk to you a little bit then about where we are at the moment, because we're 3 years on from the collapse of Lehman Brothers, aren't we? And you take into account this news that we've just had on UBS. Are we in a better position? Are the banks in a better position to deal with another financial shock if they had to?
Yeah, well, funny you should mention that, because actually prior to being CEO of Barclays Capital Israel, 3 years ago today, I ended my position as CEO of Lehman Brothers Israel. So I do remember that day very well. I guess I could talk a little about the banking system here in Israel, where there was the Israeli banking system weathered the storm extremely well due to very strong oversight by its regulators, headed by Bank of Israel Governor Stanley Fischer. And the Israeli banks made it through without taking any government money, although the government was prepared to extend them loans and credit and make investments. And as we enter well, as I hope we don't enter another financial crisis, but as we're in some shaky ground, I think banks around the world have increased their capital position, and Israel's no exception. So we're actually entering this situation even better than we entered 2008 here in Israel.
I suppose, Leonard, despite that, we do have rising concerns about a similar event, I suppose, of Lehman's magnitude potentially taking place here in Europe. When you look at the situation now, is it as bad as it was then? I mean, if we were to see, this time it seems to be more a sovereign debt crisis as opposed to a bank debt crisis. But nevertheless, when you look at the state of Europe's banks, do you see major institutions being at risk?
Well, I mean, my personal view is that this could potentially be a very bad crisis, perhaps even worse than a few years ago. My focus, of course, is on these markets here. And the banks are coming into this extremely well capitalized, and they hold very little sovereign debt from countries outside of Israel. So we're pretty confident and optimistic about getting through this.
Then do you think Greece could potentially trigger a Lehman Brothers moment? There have been rising fears about a potential default. I mean, do you think that we could see, given the pressures that banks have been coming under with liquidity problems, funding is getting increasingly tight, share prices have been falling, do you see them running into some trouble potentially this year or next?
Absolutely, that's a risk, but I think the European leadership, as demonstrated by yesterday's speech or joint announcement, are beginning to actually pull together, which I hope means pull out of this. And although it's a very strong risk, we're all hopeful that we don't get anywhere near that point.
Well, thanks very much indeed. Good to talk to you. Leonard Rosen, CEO of Barclays Capital there over in Israel.